In the heart of Austin, Texas, the headquarters of Solara Tech Solutions stood tall, a beacon of innovation in clean energy and smart living systems. But behind the gleaming glass panels and high-tech conference rooms was a secret that not a single employee knew. Ethan Parker, the company's elusive founder and CEO, had spent years building his billion-dollar empire in silence. He avoided interviews, kept his face out of the media, and lived a life far removed from the spotlight. His reason was simple. He had grown tired of the pretenses that came with his wealth. Time and time again, people, especially women, seemed to fall for his money, not for the man he truly was. So at 32, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He was going to disappear into his own company, not as a boss, but as a janitor named Mike. With the help of his loyal assistant, Ryan, Ethan transformed his appearance completely. He cut his hair short, wore old work boots, oversized khakis, and a faded green hoodie. To conceal his identity further, he darkened his skin tone slightly with makeup and used a gravelly, aged voice whenever he spoke. The confident billionaire became nearly unrecognizable. On a cloudy Monday morning, he walked through the side employee entrance, holding a beat-up mop and a small duffel bag. The security guard barely glanced at him. "You the new cleaner?" he asked. Ethan nodded and mumbled, "Name's Mike." The guard pointed toward the maintenance wing. "Go see Mr. Jenkins. He'll get you started." And just like that, the man who owned the entire company was sweeping hallways no one cared to clean. Over the next several days, Ethan worked long shifts, scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, and cleaning the break rooms. He kept his head down, but his eyes wide open. He saw how staff behaved when no one important was watching. Some were polite, but distant. Others completely ignored him, treating him as invisible. A few even went out of their way to avoid saying a single word. Ethan didn't expect red carpets, but the coldness stung. His back ached, and his hands grew rough. Yet he never broke character. He wanted to know who people really were beneath the surface, not just how they acted during meetings or when promotions were on the line. In a company built on innovation, he was searching for something far rarer, authentic human decency. It was during a late afternoon cleaning round on the third floor that Ethan first noticed her. Rachel Miller. She was sitting quietly at a desk in the IT department, tapping away on her keyboard with soft focus. There was nothing flashy about her. She wore a plain blue sweater, old sneakers, and carried a fraying canvas bag. But what stood out was her posture, straight yet relaxed, and the warmth in her voice when she greeted a delivery guy who had just dropped off printer paper. "Thank you." She smiled genuinely, helping him stack the boxes. Ethan paused in the hallway for a moment longer than he should have. She hadn't even seen him yet, but something about her energy pulled at him. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to put on a show for status or attention. She just was. Later that week, Ethan was mopping the cafeteria floor when Rachel walked in with a simple lunch packed in foil. She sat at the far corner alone, as usual. Most people chose seats closer to the windows or near their usual circles. Rachel didn't seem to mind the solitude. As she unwrapped her sandwich, she noticed Ethan working and gave him a soft nod. "You're always working hard," she said gently. Ethan looked up, startled. No one had spoken to him that day. "Just doing my part," he replied, forcing a smile. Rachel smiled back. "Well, it's appreciated. Thank you." For Ethan, it was a brief moment, but it stayed with him the entire day. It was the first time since beginning his disguise that someone looked him in the eyes and spoke with sincerity. That night, back in his modest rented apartment, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, thinking about Rachel. He wasn't used to kindness without an agenda. He remembered every word she said, the tone, the glance. "Ryan," he said during their nightly check-in call, "I think I've found someone who might actually see beyond the surface." Ryan chuckled on the other end. "Already? You've only been at this for a week." Ethan shook his head. "I don't know what it is. It's just a feeling. She didn't have to speak to me. No one else does. But she did. And I think I want to know more about her." What started as a social experiment to test authenticity had just begun to tug at Ethan's heart in a way he hadn't expected. Ethan began to pay more attention to Rachel, not as a man smitten by looks, but as someone genuinely intrigued by the quiet strength she carried. Each morning she arrived early, always alone, her shoes dusty from the long walk to work. No car, no complaints, just the steady rhythm of footsteps and responsibility. One rainy Thursday morning, Ethan watched from under a stairwell as Rachel entered the building, soaking wet, her sweater clinging to her shoulders. She stopped by the receptionist's desk and still managed to smile. Traffic was terrible, she said cheerfully, though it was clear she had walked the whole way. A few minutes later in the break room, she split her lunch just a peanut butter sandwich with a delivery clerk who had skipped his meal. Here, she said, handing it over. I'll be fine. Ethan stood nearby, wiping the counter, his chest tightening with admiration. She wasn't just kind, she was selfless in a way that couldn't be faked. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, staring at a notepad filled with Rachel's small acts of generosity he'd quietly documented. Every gesture told a story: how she brought an extra thermos of coffee for the receptionist on cold mornings, how she stayed late, helping an older employee understand a new system update, how she picked up paper someone else dropped in the hallway without ever expecting thanks. She never performed kindness like a badge. It was simply how she moved through the world. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in the shadows of the corporate machine. She was the kind of person who should be leading, not surviving. He made a decision not to reward her openly, but to lighten her burden in secret. That night he called Ryan. Find her landlord, he said, and pay 3 months of her rent. Quietly, anonymously, no names. Ryan hesitated but agreed. You're really doing this? Huh? Ethan didn't blink. She deserves at least a little peace. A week later, Rachel arrived at work visibly lighter. She wore the same humble clothes, but her steps had a softness that hadn't been there before. During her lunch break, she shared with Ethan, still disguised as Mike, that something strange had happened. Someone paid my rent, she whispered, eyes wide. I don't know who. The landlord said it was anonymous. Ethan pretended to be surprised. Wow, that's incredible, he said. She nodded slowly. I feel like God saw me struggling. Ethan wanted to tell her the truth then and there, but he held back. It wasn't about recognition. It was about honoring her spirit. Over the following weeks, more small surprises appeared: an umbrella tucked behind her locker, a proper lunchbox with her name written neatly, a new pair of walking shoes that just happened to be her size. Rachel would always look around with a puzzled smile, wondering who had been so thoughtful. But she never boasted, never suspected Ethan. She simply whispered, "Thank you," to the air and kept going. But while Ethan was falling deeper into quiet affection, not everyone admired Rachel. Greg Sanders, the company's operations manager, had always viewed her with a strange mix of indifference and entitlement. He was known for his arrogance, flashing his designer watch-bossing junior staff around and never missing a chance to remind everyone of his executive influence. When Rachel was promoted to lead a small project in her department, Greg began to take notice. At first, it was subtle extended glances during meetings, unnecessary compliments in the hallway, but it soon escalated. One afternoon, Ethan overheard him cornering her by the vending machine. You're too pretty to be buried in code, Greg said smoothly. You deserve something better, someone who can take care of you. Rachel's voice remained calm. I can take care of myself, she replied, stepping away without raising her voice. Ethan gripped his mop so tightly, his knuckles turned white. It took everything in him not to drop the act and confront Greg right there. But Rachel didn't need saving. She was already showing strength. Ethan began to notice more the way Greg tried to assign Rachel extra work, criticize her in front of colleagues, or make snide comments when she offered ideas. But Rachel never let it shake her. She remained professional, focused, and graceful. Ethan, still in disguise, made it his mission to be near whenever he could, not to intervene but to witness. He wanted to understand the world Rachel endured daily, and in doing so, his respect for her only deepened. She never retaliated, never gossiped. She simply delivered excellence quietly, like a heartbeat that never missed a beat. One afternoon, while Ethan was cleaning the stairwell, he saw Rachel help a new intern who had spilled coffee on his shirt. She didn't laugh. She didn't walk away. She handed him tissues, offered her cardigan to cover the stain, and smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan felt something stir inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. By now, Ethan knew what he felt wasn't just admiration, it was affection. Real, grounded affection. He had gone undercover to find truth in a world full of masks, and he had found it in Rachel's unassuming strength. Her compassion wasn't performative. It was instinctual. Her resilience wasn't dramatic. It was steady and quiet, like waves smoothing out jagged stones over time. He had never met anyone like her. And while he still hadn't found the right moment to tell her who he really was, he knew that he didn't just want to help her quietly anymore. He wanted to be part of her life for real, for good. But before he could take that step, he needed to be sure she saw the man, not the fortune. And that meant continuing to love her silently until the time was right. The moment had been building for weeks, and Ethan could no longer contain what he felt. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Rachel invited him to her new apartment, a modest but beautiful space she had just moved into after her promotion. The furniture still smelled new, and soft music hummed in the background as they sat near the window sipping tea. They laughed over stories from childhood, shared thoughts about their jobs, and for a brief moment the world outside disappeared. Then Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Rachel," he said gently, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him curiously, unaware of the storm behind his calm eyes. "I don't just care about you. I love you. I have for a while now. I didn't want to rush it, but I had to be honest." Rachel froze. The words hung in the air like warm mist, sweet but unexpected. She smiled softly but said nothing. "I understand if you need time," Ethan added quickly. "I just needed you to know." For the next few days, Rachel was quieter than usual. Her interactions with Ethan remained polite, even warm, but something had shifted. She no longer lingered in conversations or sought him out during lunch. At first, Ethan told himself she was just processing that feelings sometimes needed space to breathe. But behind her distant eyes, doubt had started to grow, planted not by Ethan's confession, but by a conversation she had shortly after with her colleague Megan. "So let me get this straight," Megan had said, eyes wide. "The cleaner told you he loves you, and you just got to raise a car and an apartment." Rachel nodded a bit hesitantly. Megan leaned in. "Sweetie, you need to be careful. Men like that see what you have and want a shortcut to comfort. Think about it. Why didn't he say anything when you were still walking to work and eating crackers for lunch?" Rachel didn't respond, but the seed had been planted. The words looped in her mind more than she wanted to admit. Why now? Why not before? Was Ethan just being strategic? Was she too caught up in the sweetness of his words to see the truth? Rachel hated the feeling. She had always prided herself on being discerning, strong, independent. But something about this particular doubt felt heavier than usual. Ethan had never asked her for anything, never borrowed money, never hinted at her status, never tried to manipulate her decisions. Still, the timing gnawed at her heart. She found herself pulling back both physically and emotionally, unsure how to move forward. Ethan noticed immediately. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her voice grew softer, more cautious. He didn't push. Instead, he greeted her each morning with the same smile, helped her carry things without being asked, and always stayed respectful of her space. But inside, he was breaking. It was late one evening when Rachel finally gathered the courage to speak. She found Ethan sitting alone at a quiet cafe they used to visit together. His hoodie was pulled up, his eyes thoughtful as he sipped from a cup of black coffee. She sat across from him without a word. He looked up and smiled gently. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said. Rachel folded her hands. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, "about what you said, about how you feel." Ethan waited patient. "A friend, someone I work with." Told me that maybe you said those things because of where I am now, not because of who I am. His smile faded slightly, but he didn't interrupt. And I hate that I let it get to me, she continued, voice trembling. But it did, and I've been confused ever since. Ethan set his cup down, eyes steady. Rachel, I understand. He leaned forward, hands open. You're not wrong for being cautious. The truth is, I didn't say anything earlier because I didn't want to put pressure on you. I watched the way you handled life with grace, with strength, with dignity. I wanted to support you quietly, not interrupt your peace. And yes, when you were walking to work and eating simple meals, I admired you even more. But I also knew it wasn't the right time. Not for me, and maybe not for you either. Rachel's eyes welled up. Then why now? She asked softly. Ethan breathed deeply. Because I couldn't hold it in anymore. Not because of what you've earned or where you live, but because I see you clearly now. I see your heart, and I love it. Silence followed. The weight of honesty settled between them. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. That's all I needed to hear, she whispered. They sat there for a while, not rushing, not forcing anything, just letting the space between them breathe again. Rachel didn't promise love in return, not yet, but her presence, her touch, the gentle squeeze of his hand, all spoke louder than words. It was a beginning, not one born of romance novels or fairy tales, but of real human uncertainty and quiet trust. Ethan felt the tension in his chest ease. He didn't need a declaration. What he needed was truth, and he had given it. What Rachel needed was space, and he was willing to wait. From that day forward, things didn't snap back to perfect, but they softened. Rachel smiled more. She asked about his day again, and sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd leave a note or a coffee at his workstation. It was no longer doubt that filled the air between them. It was the careful rebuilding of something deeper. The tension at Solara Tech had begun to ease as Rachel and Ethan gradually found a rhythm again. Their conversations, once quiet and hesitant, were now filled with soft laughter and growing trust. But not everyone was content with their connection. Megan, the same woman who had once warned Rachel about Ethan being a gold digger, had started seeing him differently. She'd watched the way Rachel smiled when he entered a room, noticed how calm and confident Ethan remained, even in his janitor uniform. There was something about him, his presence, his poise, that didn't match the life he pretended to live. And Megan, always chasing influence, began to feel drawn to that quiet strength. One afternoon she approached Ethan by the elevators, perfume heavy in the air, her smile deliberate. You work too hard, she said, brushing a speck of dust from his shoulder. A man like you deserves better company. Ethan paused, wary but polite. Just doing my job, he replied. Megan stepped closer, her voice dropping. You know, I used to think you were after Rachel because she got promoted. But now that I've seen you, maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're not the gold digger I am. She laughed softly, placing a hand on his chest. What do you say, Mike? Want to spend some time with someone who actually knows how to appreciate a real man? Ethan stepped back, face unreadable. You told Rachel I was after her money, he said calmly. Megan blinked, caught off guard. That was before I knew who you really were, she stammered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And who exactly do you think I am? Megan opened her mouth, but no words came. Let me help you, he continued, voice now icy. I'm not the fool you think I am. And I would never be interested in someone who switches loyalty like a light switch when it suits her agenda. Megan's smile disappeared. Stay far away from me, Ethan said firmly, and from Rachel. While Ethan tried to brush off Megan's boldness, another storm was building elsewhere. Greg Sanders, still bitter over Rachel's rejection and her growing closeness with Ethan, began tightening his grip on her workload. He nitpicked her reports, assigned her unrealistic deadlines, and undermined her suggestions in team meetings. Rachel, though hurt and exhausted, never once allowed Greg to see her break, but Ethan noticed it all. One afternoon he found Rachel sitting alone in the hallway, rubbing her temples in silence. Greg again, he asked softly. She nodded, blinking away frustration. He's making it harder every day. Ethan's jaw clenched. He doesn't get to treat you like this. Rachel touched his arm gently. Please don't do anything rash. But Ethan looked at her eyes steady. I'm not doing this as your friend. I'm doing this as someone who refuses to watch good people be stepped on. She gave a weak smile. Just be careful. Ethan smiled back, but his mind was already made up. 2 days later, a company-wide email summoned all staff to the main conference hall for an urgent leadership address. No one knew what was going on, but whispers filled the hall as employees packed into the rows. At the front of the room stood someone unexpected, Mike the janitor holding a small folder and standing beside the head of security. Greg laughed loudly from the back. What is this? A maintenance report. He scoffed. Megan crossed her arms, lips pursed in confusion. But then the large screen behind Ethan lit up with the Solara Tech logo, followed by a short video introduction that played Ethan's voice narrating the company's founding mission. As the screen faded, Ethan stepped forward, removed his cap and hoodie, and looked directly into the crowd. Good morning, he said, his voice no longer rough. My name is Ethan Parker, and I'm the founder and CEO of Solara Tech Solutions. The room fell silent. One employee dropped their pen. Megan gasped. Greg stood frozen. His smirk vanished. Ethan continued. For the past few months, I've worked among you not in a suit, not in an office, but with a mop and gloves. I wanted to see how people behave when there's nothing to gain from being kind. I wanted to see who respects others, not just titles. He paused, letting his words settle. And what I saw was both disappointing and inspiring. Some of you turned your eyes away. Some of you took advantage of your positions. But one person stood out, someone who gave, without expecting, someone who treated everyone with dignity, someone who reminded me why I started this company. Ethan looked straight at Rachel. Rachel Miller, please come forward. Rachel hesitated, stunned, but walked slowly to the stage. This woman, Ethan said, showed me humanity when I felt invisible. She reminded me that love, integrity, and kindness still exist in their purest form. Then, reaching into his pocket, Ethan knelt on one knee. The crowd gasped. Rachel, he said, voice full of emotion. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she looked out over the sea of stunned faces, then back at Ethan, the man she once believed was just a humble cleaner. She dropped to her knees beside him, nodded through the tears, and whispered, Yes. The entire room erupted into cheers. Some clapped, some cried, and even a few of the most hardened managers stood in quiet awe. But Ethan wasn't finished. He rose, helped Rachel to her feet, and turned to the head of security. Mr. Sanders, he said clearly, you've harassed a valued employee, misused your authority, and disrespected the principles of this company. Effective immediately, you are fired. Security moved quickly to escort Greg out, his face pale with disbelief. Megan stood still, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Ethan turned to the crowd once more. Let today be a reminder, he said. You never know who you're standing beside. Treat everyone with respect, not for what they have, but for who they are. The wedding took place on a warm spring afternoon beneath a canopy of white roses and golden sunlight. It was nothing extravagant, just close friends, family, and colleagues who had stood witness to the remarkable journey that brought Ethan Parker and Rachel Miller together. Rachel walked down the aisle in a simple yet elegant gown, her smile radiant and steady, her eyes locked on Ethan, who stood waiting with both pride and humility. When they exchanged vows, there were no rehearsed performances, no glittering promises of luxury, only truth, loyalty, and the shared memory of how their love had been forged, not in boardrooms or ballrooms, but in quiet hallways and cafeteria corners. When the words "I do" were spoken, they didn't just mark a union, they marked the beginning of a new chapter in a story the entire company had come to know, admire, and celebrate. Following their marriage, Ethan and Rachel took the reins of Solara Tech Solutions together, not just as CEO and director, but as partners with a unified vision. Ethan, now more visible than ever, began hosting town halls where he invited feedback from every level of the company, from interns to senior staff. Rachel, with her calm presence and deep understanding of day-to-day struggles, led new mentorship programs to support junior employees, especially women, and those from underserved communities. Under their leadership, Solara Tech didn't just grow in revenue, it grew in heart. The work culture transformed. Employees who once feared hierarchy now found encouragement. Kindness wasn't just recommended, it was expected. Even the company's tagline changed: innovation rooted in humanity. And it wasn't just branding, it was lived every day in how people treated each other. Their love story became something bigger than themselves. Employees shared it with pride, clients referenced it during meetings, and university students studied it in leadership courses. He swept the floors to learn who was real, one article wrote. She gave half her lunch to a stranger without knowing she was feeding a billionaire. Their romance challenged corporate norms and redefined success. No longer was leadership associated solely with sharp suits and corner offices. It now included emotional intelligence, humility, and deep empathy. Rachel and Ethan embodied what it meant to build something lasting, not on power or control, but on mutual respect. They held hands in boardrooms, laughed in break rooms, and led by example, never forgetting the lessons they learned, while navigating a world that had almost kept them apart. As the years passed, the legacy only deepened. New hires would be told, "Treat everyone well, you never know who's really sweeping the floor." A framed photo of Ethan in his janitor uniform, mop in hand, hung proudly in the main lobby, right beside a portrait of Rachel mentoring a young coder in her early days. Visitors often paused there, touched by the story told without words. Solara Tech's alumni began to spread across industries, carrying with them not only skills, but a new model of leadership, one that balanced strength with kindness, ambition with authenticity. Ethan and Rachel were frequently invited to speak at global conferences, not just about business strategy, but about the human side of leadership, about listening, about dignity, and about love. Even outside the corporate world, their impact was profound. They started a foundation supporting education for underprivileged youth, naming it the Miller Parker Initiative. The foundation didn't just hand out scholarships, it provided mentoring, career coaching, and wellness support, creating a generation of thinkers who valued character over credentials. Rachel often said, "It's not about lifting someone up to your level. It's about bending down, holding out your hand, and saying, 'Let's walk together.'" And she meant it. Ethan, in every interview, never failed to credit his wife, not just as his partner in business, but as the woman who changed how he viewed the world. "She saw me," he would say. "Not the money, not the job, just me." And so their story became legend, not because it was grand, but because it was true. The billionaire who disguised himself as a janitor. The woman who loved without knowing what he had. Together, they reminded everyone that real love doesn't start with status. It starts with a shared look across a crowded room, a soft good afternoon when no one else notices you exist, a moment of kindness that costs nothing but means everything. In the corridors of Solara Tech and far beyond, people still speak their names with reverence, not for what they owned, but for how they lived, how they loved, and how they turned a simple act of honesty into a lifelong legacy of love and respect. If this story moved you, we invite you to become part of the Deep Inside HQ community, where we explore the hidden truths, human connections, and extraordinary stories behind ordinary moments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who believes in real love and integrity, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful emotional journeys that stay with you long after the screen fades. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world, because here at Deep Inside HQ, we don't just tell stories. We uncover what matters most.